Right, there is a debate going on today in the UK Parliament over whether advertising and sponsorship by fossil fuel producers should be allowed to happen, because we do know that companies such as Shell and BP have supported, let's say, the British Museum, the Science Museum, the Royal Opera House, the National Portrait Gallery, the Royal Shakespeare Company and even the Tate Gallery. Well, there are calls now to outlaw the sponsorship deals that many fossil fuel companies do, particularly in the world of the arts, much like we have banned tobacco advertising. Someone who supports that particular motion is Sir Jonathan Porritt, CBE, who's an environmental campaigner, and he joins me now. I don't understand the logic of this, if I'm honest with you, Jonathan. I mean, at the end of the day, we all are told all the time that climate change is horrible, that fossil fuels are dangerous to the environment. But I kind of think they make such huge amounts of money while we still need to use them, that if they throw a bit of cash back in the direction of the arts, what's the harm?
The harm is that it gives people a false impression of the role that these companies are actually playing in society at the moment. And they're not bona fide actors. They are often acting very dishonestly in ways that we can't see. They're often obstructing people from understanding the true science of climate change. They're using some of those proceeds, some of those profits, as you said, to undermine climate scientists, to win levels of influence in ways that they can no longer really lay claim to. So the comparison with banning the advertising of and the marketing of cigarettes is a very appropriate one, because it really is true now that these fossil fuel companies are acting against the interests of society as a whole in a way that is prejudicial to the interests of all citizens, not just here in the UK as it happens, but this is obviously the country where we can begin to make a difference.
I mean, there are a lot of people, particularly my listeners, who feel that the net zero targets have been very onerous on the United Kingdom, that perhaps while we still have to import fossil fuels, things like liquefied natural gas from abroad, that we are going to need fossil fuels to pave the way for any transition to the full green energy revolution, and that actually that this might be sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face. I mean, pension funds have lots of investments shored up in big oil and big gas. What's going to happen to all of these all these museums and galleries that are currently have very lucrative sponsorship deals with energy companies? Is this not essentially throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
Well, it's not really a baby. It's an absolutely huge monster that you're talking about. And what will happen depends on how smart we are in making this transition. The transition is going to happen, Alex, come what may. The transition is absolutely unavoidable, because otherwise we, like many other countries in the world today, will be exacerbating a problem that's already very, very severe indeed. So you mentioned a couple of examples, such as people's investments in fossil fuels. Okay, the writing's on the wall for everybody who manages those pension funds. We are going to have to get our investments out of fossil fuels. So start planning for that now. People, organizations, museums being sponsored by fossil fuels, it is inevitable that will come to an end. So start planning to do that now. There are plenty of arts organizations that are not dependent on sponsorship from fossil fuel companies that are making a perfectly good go of that. It's a question of understanding the nature of this transition, which we're in. It's starting already. And we just need to know that it's going to accelerate, and therefore we need to plan for it.
But surely we need the big energy firms to be at the centre of that transition. We need them on side. We need to sort of make sure that they're part of the sort of kumbaya singing circle of environmental activists and not ostracised. And surely, actually, if they're sort of not going to be sponsoring various museums and art galleries, they're just going to recoup that money for themselves.
I don't understand your point, apart from the cheap insult. I don't understand your point.
No, what I'm saying is, at the moment, at least there's a philanthropic edge to some of their profits where they're giving those to particular social endeavours. And if they're banned from doing that, we're sort of destroying the relationship with the very companies we need to be part of any sort of energy revolution. And they'll just keep the money.
We don't need those companies to be part of the energy revolution. Those companies all had a chance some time ago to transition away from their investments in fossil fuels and to become integrated energy companies. And for a long time, companies like Shell and BP actually said that's what they were going to do. They would diversify their portfolios, they'd reduce the amount of new capital going into fossil fuels, and they'd come out at the other end, firstly as a more integrated energy company, and then basically a pure play, renewable storage efficiency type company. They then went back on all of that. It was all just so much greenwash. So they let down, they betrayed people who thought that the big energy companies could be part of the transition and help with that transition. It turns out they can't. They absolutely can't, because they're under massive pressure to go on generating these profits for their shareholders. So they are not significant players in the transition to a fossil fuel-free future. They're not. And we don't need them to be that either.
Do pension funds not need them to be that?
Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, pension funds are just going to have to understand that the future of their holdings cannot continue to depend on companies that are causing such massive damage to the interests of humankind. It will come. This is just inevitable. When people understand the nature of the risk that we're running by continuing to depend on fossil fuels, by our continuing addiction, as is being pointed out by people, then those changes will happen. So the point that we're saying in all of this is get ready for it. Stop going into these kind of denial and concerns about things that are just inevitable. Get ready for it.
Sir Jonathan Porritt, CBE environmental campaigner, thank you ever so much for coming on and explaining that particular debate going on in Parliament today.